All right, we're going to take notes on two works of art on the same page, and we're going to be comparing them together. If you haven't gotten the identifying information for number 18, it's right here. And then the identifying information for the seated scribe is right there. So please make sure you have that written down. All right, so we're going to work on this note page. And I'm going to, if you are with me in class, I'm going to give you some post-it notes. If you're not with me in class, you don't have to write on post-it notes. I'm just going to be doing this so that it's like a compare and contrast. I would have loved to also have done a Venn diagram, but I didn't think of that beforehand. So we're going to work with what we have, okay? So on the bottom, I have this College Board skill that we need to be able to do that says, explain why a specific work of art or a group of related works of art demonstrates continuity, so continuing a tradition, or change within an artistic tradition, style, or practice. So we're going to kind of focus on this question as we talk about these works. So again, if you're in here, I'm going to give you these different color post-it notes. I want you to try to arrange them like this. You don't have to cut out the head. I just did that so I can still see him. If it covers up the head, that's fine. If you don't have post-it notes, it's totally fine. Just write down on the paper, okay? It's not that big of a deal. All right, so the first thing, so that orangish golden color, that's like the middle of our Venn diagram. That's the overlap between the two. These are going to be similarities. And then the yellow is going to talk specifically about King Mankaura and Queen Mankaura, sorry. And then the pink is going to specifically be talking about the seated scribe. And then in the middle, it's the similarities. So we're first going to start talking about form in talking about the Egyptian artistic conventions. So this is talking about traditions within Egyptian artwork. So for Mankaura and Queen, whenever there is a pharaoh depicted, they are going to be idealized versus the seated scribe on the right. Why does he look the way he does, right? Why does he look really realistic? He looks like a human. And it's because of being a lower rank of a scribe. So write those down. All right, so what does it mean to be idealized? King Mankaura is an example of being idealized. So this is youthful and athletic. We're going to see this again with Greek and with Roman. This is one of our Roman sculptures of a ruler, an emperor. He's actually older when this is made, but they are depicting him as this youthful, athletic, strong warrior type of ruler. King Mankaura is wearing the royal attire, which is a kilt, the headcloth, and then the false beard. And then he is being depicted as strong, tight, and rigid. That's his pose. Versus on the right, you have the seated scribe, who's a lot more naturalistic. He portrays, I can't see, let me see. He portrays individuality in the body type and his lips. And if you look at the bottom, I want you guys to highlight what I have highlighted. So in contrast to statues of pharaohs, the lower rank of the scribe allowed the sculpture to convey a more individual character. The sculpture has also cut away, we're going to talk about that next. All right, so he portrays individuality in the body types and the lips. His body type is a lot softer. It's a lot curvier. He's got some flab, a little rounder. And this is all representing his status, that he is free from hard labor because he is a scribe. All right, another similarity, they are both carved from one piece of stone. So that's going to be in our similarity column for form. So King Mankaura and the Queen, when those guys are carved, there is no negative space. So the stone that they are carved from is still supporting them behind them. It's still between, like in their armpits. It's not carved away. So there's a lack of negative space for King Mankaura and Queen. And then on the right with the seated scribe, the negative space has been cut away. So that's a difference between the two. The reason King Mankaura and Queen that it is not cut away is because they don't want things to break off. This gives it more stability. It makes it stronger. Therefore, it's designed to last for eternity because nothing will break. So the one on the right, the seated scribe, this by cutting away the negative space, it reduces the monumentality. And I got this from down here. Thereby reducing the monumentality of this statue as compared with that of Khafre, and that is Mankaura's dad. That's a different sculpture. Also says the depiction of the scribe is also more personalized than that of Khafre. He has a roll of fat around his torso, a pot belly, and sagging breasts. That's what that says down there. So that is his more individualized body type. All right, the pose, the position that they're in, their gesture reflects their position in society. So King Mankaura has one foot striding forward, like he's walking, except his hips are not reflecting that movement at all because he's supposed to be tight and strong and firm. Then compared to her feet, she's also stepping forward, the queen, except his striding foot is more so than hers. And you can also relate that back to the votive figures. So his foot is actually coming out a little farther than the other foot. Also, the way they're depicting the ankles is very similar. Like with King Mankaura and Queen, they figured out the proportions that the wrist gets tinier, right? And then it gets wider at the elbows, but they're not doing that when it gets tinier and skinnier at the ankle. It's just kind of interesting. All right, and then the seated scribe, he is portrayed at work. So he is holding a scribe, which is a reed pen in his hand, and his papyrus to start writing. Okay, context. Both of these were part of a funerary tradition, but they were both different in how they were used. So the Mankaura sculpture was found in Mankaura, and again, that's Khafre's son, Valley Temple. So when we talked about the three pyramids, the smallest pyramid was Mankaura's pyramid, and then there's the causeway, and then there's the Valley Temple. So that's where this sculpture was found. The Valley temples were used as active places of worship near the pyramids. This is where people would come to worship instead of going inside the pyramid that was sealed. I love these archaeological photographs of when they discover these sort of pieces. These are also found at Mankaura's Valley Temple, and they all have like a backing to them. So they're not freestanding sculptures. They have this stone slab that they are still being supported by. Okay, and then the seated scribe is from a necropolis in Saqqara, which is in Egypt. And this scribe was so important that he had his own tomb. So I highlighted that in the bottom. This particular scribe must have been of high status because he had his own tomb. All right, function. They both of these sort of funerary sculptures served as a dwelling space for the deceased person's ka. And the ka would refer to their soul. So the function, we're going to talk about King Mankaura and Queen. Having this sort of a sculpture would ensure the rebirth for the king in the afterlife. And since it was at the Valley Temple, it also served as a focus for worship in the Valley Temple. When people were to go there, it would give them something to look at, to worship the king. And then the scribe, the function was to provide a scribe for a pharaoh in the afterlife. All right, here is a detail of the eyes. So what I did on mine was I kind of drew a little arrow to the side and I wrote the eyes are inlaid with lots of different materials. So I wrote inlaid eyes of rock crystal, etc., ETC for etc. So the eyes, so this whole thing is limestone, and then they inlaid, it's like mosaic. They put another material in there to give it that glassy, realistic look. They also did wood inlay for the nipples. If you want to write that as well, you can. All right, and then I wrote a little bit more about this piece underneath the, underneath this top left post-it. I like lifted it up and wrote a little bit more about King Mankaura and Queen. So they have traces of red paint on the man's face. You can kind of see a little bit on the ear. And that was a traditional color for the males. They would paint them in red because they were the ones working outside in the sun. So the men were going to be a lot darker than the women. The women were more inside. There's traces of black paint that was found on her hair. Her embrace, how she's wrapping around, is part of what unifies these two together. And she looks very naked, but I'm going to point out she is not naked. And when we get to Hinduism, this is a sculpture from the Lakshmana temple, and they all also look naked, but they have bits of jewelry that is going in like bits of fabric where they are clothes. And it's very similar for her. You can see the bottom of her dress. She's wearing a very tight fitting sheer piece of fabric. Oh, and then overall, sorry, she is depicted more naturalistic as the king. He is more idealized. She would be more naturalistic. Okay, Here is an example of a test question from the College Board. The statue of the seated scribe indicates that sculptors in Old Kingdom Egypt were willing to deviate from the traditional canon of representations, as exemplified by the statue of King Mankaura and Queen, when they were A, memorializing loved ones so as to emphasize unique attributes. Is that what they're doing? Are they memorializing loved ones? I guess they are, but let's keep going. Are they depicting an important character found in the Book of the Dead? Not that we know of. Are they chronicling the ravages of age and ill health? I don't believe so. Are they portraying figures of relatively lesser social status? So that would be the reason why they are deviating from the traditional canon of representation. The statue of the seated scribe indicates that sculptors in Old Kingdom Egypt were willing to deviate. That means move away from the tradition, as exemplified by the statue of King Mankaura and Queen. This is exemplifying the tradition when portraying figures of relatively lesser social status. Although the scribe would have occupied a position of honor, he was of far less social importance than a pharaoh and could therefore be depicted with greater naturalism. Boom.